We have Ankit Bose, who is the head of AI at NASCOM, and we have Rishikesh Kanegaonkar, who is the head digital and information technologies at Nyara Energy, and he comes with a wealth of experience in industries such as oil, gas, FMCG, and retail. Um, and our esteemed panelists today would be exploring and sharing their beliefs and core principles on what should be the core principles and infrastructure required to build a secure and trusted AI ecosystem. They may be highlighting some best practices, solutions to address the existing challenges so that we can enable a safe, scalable, and inclusive AI transformation. So, what we would be doing now is we have a 30 minutes rapid fire panel where I would be asking the panelists two set of questions and they would have 3 minutes to respond. Then we would try to take a few questions or comments from the room. And at the end, we have a report which we would be launching, the launch of it. So, without much ado, I would jump to Raju first because that's how my paper is. And Raju, from an infrastructure provider's lens, what does resilience by design practically mean today for AI workloads in India? You can see. You can see.
Yeah, first, but in general, forget about the AI. In general, data centers means it has to be resilience. That means it has to be always on, and it has to meet certain SLAs, quality levels. So when people talk about the data centers, it's not a real estate game. It is involve a lot of other things. You have to build the data centers for the purpose of high density servers, racks, and providing all the new technologies, plumbing required for the data centers. And also it has to be connected from the day one, and the power energy. So the challenge, power is very important. It has to be always having a not only the grid power, renewable energy is very very important. And the fourth one is important is managing the data centers not anymore easy, because the kind of variables you have in the managing a data centers, there are thousands of parameters. So how we are going to apply AI into operations point of view, those are also very important for the data centers. So looking at all these things, when you're talking, you're hosting somebody like Aadhaar or NPCI, UPI or DZYATRA into that kind of a data center, it always has to be on. Otherwise, the it's going to create big chaos in the system. So those are the things we have to look at it very carefully, and it is a mission critical applications we are building. So it's very important, and also a place like in India, you have to build very cost effective also. That's very important. So that's the way I look at it. What is important for resilience point of view?
Thank you, Raju, for sticking to the time and also highlighting the higher issues which needs to be addressed if we really want what we want, aspire to be. And with that, I move to Shahana. While India wants to do a lot of things, but from a legal and policy standpoint, what minimum regulatory clarity do enterprises need today for creating this resilient AI infrastructure?
Thank you, Amrita, and thank you for inviting us to this event. Obviously, a milestone in India's AI journey. I want to answer that question in two ways. I think there are very many critical criteria on which clarity is still required to stimulate investment in AI infrastructure in India in particular, and AI infrastructure that is trustworthy. And I think very few of those parameters require regulatory or policy intervention, right? So I think the top three criteria that I would look at, and I'm speaking, looking at this from a private practitioner, I'm a lawyer, I'm looking at it from that perspective, is that like Raju sir said, there has to be availability of resources. There are currently, I think, between the top four tech companies, 4 or 5 tech companies, there's about $600 billion committed towards building out trusted AI infrastructure, out of which there is just a paltry amount that has been committed towards building that infrastructure out in India, right? And so one of the important criteria is that how do we show availability and reliance of utilities, of resources, of electricity, of water, etc. That's an incredibly important parameter. And that issue is actually fairly fragmented because a lot of it is controlled at a state government level, highly fragmented. And then the other two issues actually are around what sort of tax regime do I have? Do I have a favorable and stimulating enough tax regime? I think there have been some initiatives taken under the current budget proposal. But I think there are details to be worked out over there and more to be done. So perhaps the tax framework is something that certainly will require more regulatory and policy intervention. But the third issue, which is around risk classification and liability allocation, is something that I believe doesn't necessarily require regulatory intervention at this point, and therefore, no regulatory clarity, because this is largely something that needs to be left to the market forces. It needs to be left to the private stakeholders who are negotiating depending on what their place is in the AI ecosystem in the value chain. And just simple things, right? That what how can I, what are the best practices, what are the contractual mechanisms through which I can allocate liability throughout the AI value system, right? If I'm an end user, how do I do that when I don't have privity or when I don't have contact necessarily with the developers or the deployers? So what are those mechanisms, what are those best practices looking like? How can I get support to interpret an existing law? So specifically around the DPDP Act, which is the privacy law in India, yet to be implemented. There are questions around how do I use my data in the context of building models, in the context of training my models, given that there is this new law that has now put in place these rules on how to process data. So I think more than building more around regulatory intervention, I think these are the opportunities where either best practices are developed, leveraged, shared, or where there is support on what the interpretation of an existing framework would look like.
Thank you so much, Shahana, for this. I think that interpretation part is critical, and even the synergy between the available, getting the resources, states, center, etc. All those things are difficult. With this, I'll come to Chengita, and we'll take a bit of a global lens. What role can multi-stakeholder global platforms such as the IGF help in developing nations to build capacity so that they can shape norms for resilient AI infrastructure in their countries, looking at the global policies, but also having a local context.
Thank you very much, Amrita, and also like to thank the organizers for inviting me. The IGF is a multi-stakeholder model, and it ensures that developing countries are not just policy takers, but also engage on an equal footing in discussions as co-creators of norms. Through the national, regional, and our youth IGF initiatives, local realities are brought directly into the global discussions and also vice versa. Context matters. There is no one size fits all for AI governance. The IGF is a bottom-up process for that particular reason, meaning that its work is driven by stakeholder priorities across the different regions. So the US does not have the same priorities as India, for example. Last year at the IGF in Norway, over 6,000 multi-stakeholders set a strong message, as you can see in our Lillestrøm IGF messages. AI infrastructure and its global governance must reflect different levels of digital maturity, data ecosystems, and institutional capacities, and aim to advance them. The IGF helps shift the discussions from adopting models to adopting principles. This supports developing countries in identifying fit for purpose approaches grounded in their realities. Through IGF initiatives, the national regional initiatives, the youth initiatives, and also our training efforts, stakeholders from developing countries also gain the knowledge and confidence to engage meaningfully. This is essential to avoid asymmetries in shaping AI governance frameworks. There's also a growing awareness among member states on this. For example, in the WSIS Plus 20 resolution from December last year, which you helped with, explicitly reaffirms the need to strengthen the participation of developing countries in digital governance processes and to bridge digital and data divides, recognizing that emerging technologies, including AI, must be developed and governed in an inclusive and development-oriented manner. I think of my 3 minutes are up. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chengetai, for this. And I'll move to Ankit now. Ankit, you work with a lot of business organization industry, I would say. So what do you see are the top structural bottlenecks stopping companies from investing in resilient governance practices?
Thank you for having me. Great question, right? I'm taking it from the enterprise lens, right? I will tell you a structural problem and then go to the pointers, right? The structural problem is that the business team wants in enterprise, the business team wants the best use case to be implemented, right? And reap that benefit, right? The technical team who is implementing, right? They want to implement the way they want to implement, right? The legal team and the risk team is basically held accountable for any issues, right? Similarly, the finance team is basically budgeting, right? The structural issue is that when you are running at a probably 120 mile per hour, and you have to have the guardrails, you have to have the governance, right? You take care of all of that, right? The structural issue becomes an issue, right? Why? Because everyone has their own KPI, don't have a joint KPI, right? So I think that's the first thing. So the business team would want the best tech in the cheapest amount, without any ownership of legality, governance, all of that. The risk team will want the otherwise. The finance team will say why you are spending it. It's a too much spend, right? I think that's the first point, structural issue. Now, if I go down to the specifics, right? Again, there are 4 or 5 key points here. The first point is the ROI and the budgeting mismatch. There's a big ROI and budgeting mismatch because of the same structural issue, right? So ROI is expected fast, right? As fast as within deployments, within few weeks, right? But that's not the case, right? That's the first thing. Second issue, big issue is the understanding of the domain and putting the right guardrails, right? Again, internally you will have pockets of understanding, but again, there's no joint understanding, right? The third issue is in the whole landscape of things, there's a big issue of tool and availability of that tool in an enterprise, right? So that's the third one. Fourth, which is the biggest, I will say, is the talent issue, right? Again, who should implement the whole governance piece? Someone who understands the business, the risk, the legality, right, or the tech. And the fifth issue is the overall coherence and thinking of the end user, the customers, right? I think that's what I see. And the statement I will end with is if you think this issue in enterprise from a lens of compliance, it will have its bottleneck and resistance, right? Instead of that, think of scale, enterprise grade, right? I think that is something which will take it ahead.
Thank you so much for this, Ankit, and bringing in some of the ground realities which most enterprise organizations battle with. Rishi, my question to you. What do you see are the main barriers to integrate AI infrastructure in existing enterprise processes, and how do you think leaders can embed resilience and reliability from the start?
Sure. Thanks, Amrita. Thanks, the organizers. Thanks, Sophie, to this Mahakumbh of the AI summit that we are all in. Good morning, everyone. an interesting question, and I'll carry on from where Ankit spoke of ROI. I'd approach it from a structured methodology perspective to implementing AI projects, be it agentic AI, generative AI, be it AI in general. If we approach it from an ideation phase where ideation does not come in from the IT organization but comes in from the business. And how that happens is with a cultural mind shift change, with the business teams, the organizations, the functions talking of how they could better their functionalities, their functions, their processes with the use of AI, and then follow it up with an ROI upfront before a single line of code is entered. What we are currently talking of is establishing an ROI. And snippets of ROI could be, if I break it down into 4 or 5 different heads, the first head could be the number of tokens, the LLM, and the value per metric, per query. What does it constitute? Maybe 25% of the total costs? Okay, so that's the number that you've got to budget upfront. The second would be talent and development, to invest in the teams who are developing AI. The third could be the infrastructure, uh, which Sifi and a few others are kind of investing heavily in. How much of it does the organization contribute into? And then there are several others in terms of operations, in terms of ethical AI, governance, and all of those costs around operations and support and all of that. That's the TCO bit. And then you compare the TCO to the value. And this value again comes in from the business, tying back the processes and how much of it can be realized. So that's one number that you get into before you start the project. And then when you get into the actual project, I'll not call it as a pilot. Pilot is such a misused word. People nowadays are calling it as MLP, which is minimum lovable product, right? So you start with an MLP, and then you start getting into the guardrails, the data and integration bit. I'll just take 1 minute more. I'm mindful of the time. So when you get into that is when the actual problem starts surfacing in terms of, is my data ready? Are the guardrails ready? How am I going to tie up the integration bit? And there are a few things that we're looking at here in terms of the governance aspects. There are agent-to-agent protocols that one needs to look at in terms of how does the entire protocol work, how does the governance layer work. We're talking of even an MCP protocol where there are clear kind of demarcations in terms of roles of each of these agents and how does it interact with the LLM layer and all of that. So all of this kind of contributes into the next step, which is to get into the implementation phase, where whatever was being discussed from a use case perspective, how much of it gets realized into the MLP iteration 1. Measure the value, get back into measuring what was envisioned versus how am I performing. Iterate again, go back and complete the feedback loop, then go back through the cycle of data integration and all of that and get into the actual process. And that's when you would establish whether you could trust the answers and then kind of evaluate once you get into that single iteration, which is the evaluation could be, do I need to be accurate? I might not need to be accurate at times, but I might need to maybe look at a more a theoretical answer, or I might need an AI to perform from a workflow perspective. I might need to have a very creative answer coming about. So for each of these, the evolution and the evaluation of whatever model we are developing needs to kind of reach its stage 1 completion, and then you iterate back and complete this process. And along this, the entire process around security, governance, responsible AI, ethical AI, the things that Raju mentioned, the things that everyone on this panel is mentioning, all of this needs to be intact. I think once we approach it from this perspective, we'll see a lot of benefits coming out of it, and through a structure, implement it like an IT program. If we start AI projects by calling them as pilots, then I think we'll never see those pilots fructify into production. So I think we need to get into a structured methodology.
Right. Thank you so much. And I'll come back to Raju now. Raju, you've been hearing all this and you've been seeing the Indian enterprises. So, how do you see Indian enterprises balancing the push towards hyperscale AI infrastructure with the need for distributed, edge, and sovereign architectures, looking at the geopolitical situation we are in these days?
First, I want to address one thing. For me, people should not consider AI is a project. AI is a journey because it's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to be continuous process, like how we evolving as a humans, intelligent. So that is where it's not end. So it's going to be continuously is going to evolve. Second, what you said is hyperscalers. The way I look at it is very simple, Amrita, is AI, when you look at it, who are investing in AI at this point? In LLMs and the training, there are hardly, forget about the countries, there are only five, six companies in US and two, three companies in China. The kind of amount of the money is required to support the GPUs and the whole infrastructure. So that is I call phase one. And we learned so many things and created how, evolved in this, how many generations of NVIDIA chips people are buying every 6 months, 9 months. A country like in India, and to be honest, it's still IT point of view, we're still a long way to go, right? And for us, I think the phase we are entering now, I call phase two. We are defining the use cases and the company like Naira. How do we get the benefit of it? That's very important. To do this, I strongly believe the hybrid model, hyperscalers plus private cloud, that is the right model for India. And that is the way I see the India is going to evolve. One point, probably, we will develop ourselves hyperscalers. But if you look at the enterprise's point of view, to offer the same resilience like hyperscalers, they have to do what is they called, zones, hyperscalers calls multi. It's not DCDR, it's multiple zones to be mission critical applications. So those things will be very cost sensitive things. And enterprises, we are moving from the server rooms to colo to clouds. So I think, we are going to be spent wisely. And India being, the way somebody asked me, what is India? I look at three things. One is India is a scale. You need to aim at big scale. And India, I don't call cheap because I call cost effective. You have to be cost effective to operate in India. And India, you have to have a long term sustainability. So those are the three things I look at it, how India is going to evolve in this technology. And for India, this is the great opportunity to leapfrog. The way I look at is, the building data centers, building IT resources, the skill sets we have from IT transformed to the AI, and we have the biggest assets on the globe. Taking advantage of that, and we need to take, India has to take advantage of AI. And like you said, how do we do? Is it India? It's not only the six or seven metro cities, and we have tier two, tier three cities. So there also is very important. How do we build this ecosystem in tier two, next 20 cities? Those are very important for a inferencing a low latency for like Naira. A factory cannot get the latency reaching to the Mumbai, 30 milliseconds or whatever it is. So to act those kind of things, AI, AI is at the end of the day is simple. You have to have a lot of high, accelerated computing. And second is you need to have low latency. So considering all these things, how India is going to take advantage of AI, I think there's a lot of potential. I don't believe, it's a 5 year or a 6 year project. Probably it's a 20 years of journey. How India is going to evolve in AI. I think it's going to be how internet changed our life. I think AI is going to change our lives. No, pre-AI, post-AI. Now we are talking about, pre-internet, right, Amrita? And post-internet. Now it's going to be pre-AI and post-AI. I think that's what we are going to see next 20 years, That's what I look at it.
Thank you, Raju. And no, those were very, I think, gave a very high level thing of how things are, more clarity. And Shahana, while you spoke a bit about it, you know, when AI infrastructure is increasingly being used for critical infrastructure, um, and is becoming a critical infrastructure because it's been used in such a way, and given India's aspiration how should its regulatory structure evolve? You elucidated to it in the previous response, but quickly, if you could, because there are talks about governance, but do we really need to govern it? Can best practices work now?
Yeah. Thanks, Amrita. And I think for any legal practitioner, any lawyer in the room, this is the $1 million question, right? What should that what should that approach be? Thankfully, I'm not the only one. The Indian government, as are any other government and multilateral organizations, also thinking about it. Look, I think. I actually see a lot of value in the approach that the Indian government is taking, in that they are thinking about it, right? They are evaluating what is going on in the world. They're evaluating what is it that we want to govern and regulate and mitigate against. What are those risks? What are those harms? We don't want to bring a framework in just for the sake of bringing a framework in. So that, I think, is incredibly valuable, because some of us were talking just before the session, some of the panelists, and we were saying that, look, I think in the EU, yes, the AI Act is, just from an academic point of view, is a great piece of legislation. They have done a lot to help with risk classification, but is it something that actually stimulates innovation? We perhaps not, right? That seems to be early indications. And so I think the kind of approach that India has taken, that horizontally we want to take a very light touch approach. We want to rely on existing laws in India to sweep up whatever risk and harm may be emanating from development, deployment, use of AI systems. I think that's a very, very valuable approach. Idea is that we want to stimulate the investment, we want to stimulate the growth, and perhaps getting a policy or a regulatory framework that is not just right will do more harm than benefit in the long run. And I think the interesting, there are, obviously a lot of sectoral pronouncements that have already occurred in this space. We've seen how intermediary platforms are being subject to content regulation, labeling, due diligence requirements. In the BFSI sector, we've seen a lot of pronouncements around disclosure requirement based on transparency principles. And that is perhaps appropriate, because it is the regulator who is being able to determine, based on, what is the sector that they are regulating, that what are the appropriate measures that we need to put in place. So I think this kind of almost like a hybrid approach, where some of the horizontal requirements are going to continue to be light touch. They're going to be tech agnostic to a large degree. And the sectoral regulators will be, is where we will see some progress in terms of what that governance framework should look like. Now, having said that, Amita, I think what is also incredibly valuable is developing governance structures in any event, right? But that should be based on really a self-regulatory approach. It should be based on best practices. It should be based on what is relevant to that sector, to that industry. Because I think there is, especially what Ankit and Rishi were talking about, on how an organization expects such incredible ROI so quickly. Having an internal governance structure will become very important to that sustainability, right? Like the way Rishi was saying, that you have to move beyond the pilot stage, and having that governance framework within your organization, irrespective of where you lie in the AI value chain, having that governance system will be incredibly valuable.
Thank you, Shahana. And I'll move to Chengitai, and I'm mindful of time, so 3 minutes for each person. Chengitai, my question is, at the IGF, you have various intersessionals like the Policy Network on AI. So what role can they play in fostering a more nuanced, evidence-based understanding that prevents the fragmentation of the global AI infrastructure landscape?
Thank you very much for the question, Amrita. The IGF serves as a neutral space for convergence of ideas. While it does not negotiate binding rules, it plays a critical role in aligning understanding across stakeholders, across regions. This helps reduce the risk of fragmented AI infrastructure ecosystems. The Policy Network on AI, we call it the PNAI, brings together diverse expertise to develop evidence based insights on AI governance and infrastructure. And I think one of our key contributions as well is that we actually raise the voices from developing countries so that the discussion is not just dominated by yes, exactly. Thank you. It helps unpack complex issues and such as compute access, data governance, and interoperability in a nuanced, balanced, and inclusive way, helping align to move forward from silos to shared knowledge. The PNAI synthesizes inputs from across sectors and regions, creating common reference points, even where policy approaches may differ. AI infrastructure is inherently global. There's compute, there's data flows, there's standards, and they are deeply interconnected. The IGF helps stakeholders understand these interlinkages and helps reduce the risk of policy decisions that unintentionally fragment ecosystems. And it does this by grounding the discussions in case studies, community inputs, and multi-stakeholder dialogue. The IGF counters exclusive-based or imported policy approaches. Policy should be relevant to those in the ecosystem, in the ground, and it must be relevant to the stakeholders in that arena. The goal is not identical regulation, but interoperable approaches based on shared principles such as openness, security, and inclusiveness. And 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm okay now. And how can Indian companies meaningfully integrate resilience throughout the life cycle?
Yeah. I think resilience is linked to how the product is built, right? Again, Masrur's statement, shift left, right? Shift left, then, wait for the afterthought. So when you're building a product, when you're building a service or a feature, right, you think of resilience as a core central piece, then thinking at the end, right? I think that's the overall statement. Coming to specifics, I think what I will suggest is, talent basis a use case, right? Again, a high impact or high risk use case should be having a different level of resiliency and governance versus a low, right? Set minimal or minimal viable standards for data governance, minimal data standards or standards for uh, response, right? Have human in the loop when it is high risk, right? I think these are some features I will recommend, right? But definitely, beyond enterprise, I think when we are talking about resilience and governance as a feature, the industry, right, and the ecosystem can also give incentives, right? Government can give incentives to companies who are building resiliency and governance at the core, right? Uh, VCs can give incentives or brownie points to the startups who are building it as core, right? Then having afterthought, right? I think that's also very important. Enterprises who are adopting any product or services, they can give them additional technical pointers, right? I think that's the mix. I think from an enterprise lens or a product lens, and from the ecosystem lens.
Thank you so much for this. And Rishi, the last question to you. How should organizations measure and sustain resilience outcomes for AI systems once they graduate from proof of concept to core business workloads?
Right. So, for an enterprise like ours, where 8.5% of energy requirements for India come in from our refinery in Mardinar, imagine what resilience means for us. I look at it from three different perspectives. Technical resilience, from the perspective of making sure that the core, the infrastructure is always available. We look at it from not just accuracy of the models, but also from uptime, similar to the uptime that you'd measure for your business critical applications. If I were to deploy an AI for a mission critical process, the first part would be resilience from an uptime perspective. The second would be also from the users who use it from a technical perspective. Is there something that the solution suggests, or a workflow or process which demands an immediate automation, should the human in the loop be there? Should I bypass it or should I retain it? Those are the kind of things that I would need to worry about. The second part would be looking at it from an operational resilience perspective. From an ops resolution perspective, what it means is, uh, have I conducted my AI drills for business critical applications? Yes. Why can't I convert an AI drill or create an AI drill for applications wherever it's a process that is automated? That could that could be something that the teams should look at necessarily. Also, in terms of workflows that are automated, agents that are working, uh, the human element is what we talked of already, but there are other things that come into place, like uh, from a business critical process. Is that process going to be hampered positively or negatively? I'd rather also worry about not just accuracy, but how do we ensure that the results that are through are errors. And if there are errors, how does the business or the operations team push through those kind of processes? The third part is the governance layer of resilience. From a governance perspective, from a leadership perspective, what it means is to make sure that it covers an overall set of guidelines, guardrails, and how we assure ourselves, the organization assures itself in terms of not just deploying projects, products, services, but also making sure that things like maybe data drift, making sure that the feedback again and again comes back to the business team, and then there's validation and processes that happen there, so that the overall process does not get hampered. It kind of improves, and we are on and on kind of really improving feedback mechanism so that the model delivers its required resolution, required successes. That's it.
Thank you so much. We have time to take 3 questions. We would want very short questions, introduce yourself questions. We'll take all the 3 and then our panelists will respond. So I see you here, there's another gentleman. So please introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Very brief.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Such a fantastic topic. My name is Surya G. Gupta, and I have 2 questions. One to Mr. Raju. See, these data centers, they place so much of, demand for energy. And already our grid systems are like, very stressed because of renewable energy, wind and everything. So how do you see the grid infrastructure also to evolve as the data centers evolve? That is my question. The other question is to Mr. Chengentai. As Ankit said, the ROA is to scale as the organization scale. Now, from the country's point of view, there is this data sovereignty where, each country is trying to limit, the scaling up of other countries to enter their country data sovereignty and all those things. So there is a paradox, right? I mean, the enterprises wants to scale and countries are limiting. So how does do you resolve this kind of a paradox from a international organization? Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Saurabh. I have 10 years of experience in this field, AI, ML, and now agentic. So I deeply care about building trust in AI. I think that really matters to the business, to the government, and the legal department. And that's why I've been building an open source project called Glassbox, not Blackbox. My question is, how do we move from just talking about responsible AI to actually building systems where trust is embedded by the design? By design, especially when these systems go from POC to full production, because that's where I think the things are breaking at this right time. We see a lot of repetitive processes. We want to automate them. We want to build workflows. The piggies like us build the workflow, but they never go live because we can't trust them. So should we have some kind of constitutional frameworks like inside the AI systems, which kind of embedded in the system itself, and we can have templates and we can evolve them. And so I want to know about like what kind of possibilities out there, with what horizon and with what auditability. The government is not going to audit everything by itself. We need systems and frameworks in place. So what kind of systems do you envision?
He has.
Should we take the responsibility? So,
No, no, we'll take the three
Yeah.
because I'm also mindful of time.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for such a lovely session till now. So I take it from Mr. Raju that it's a journey that we are going into. Now we are all talking about responsibility, liability, and that is just going. And again, it needs to be. I also believe in a bottom-up approach. Now I was just thinking, what kind of department there should be? Shall we have an AI department in our organizations to handle all these different challenges, whether it is from legal, whether understanding ROI or the technology or the talent gap, to resolve our day-to-day challenges and adoption of the AI in the organizations. So, just one quote from each one of you. What would be the characteristics of those departments? Thank you.
Thank you. So I start from Ankit. Everyone, one minute to respond to the questions, whichever you want.
So I'll come to him and him. I think his question so specific. So I think 30 seconds for you. I think compliance as a code is something which is picking up, right? So you can have compliance at the code level, right, which can be embedded at the AI systems, which will give you a technical person as well as business person from a code lens, right? Again, most of the compliance when it's deployed, it's top down. It's the the audit team, so they do it. But if you do it both ways, I think it will be better. That's one. We can talk more on that. Coming to you, I think AI is becoming a multimodal sort of department in the company. If you really scale with the right pace and right governance level, right, you need multiple things, not only tech people, right? You need the business people to be aware. You need the right budgets. You need the right skilling hiring plan. So definitely, it's prudent to have a cross-functional team who is running all of that, right? I think which is seeing the pace, the technicalities, the business benefits, and the governance aspect of it. I think that's what I will suggest.
Thank you. I'll also address your question and then your question, sir. Don't underestimate the value of capacity building. That goes such a long way in demystifying concerns and building trust. 10 years ago, we were talking to stakeholders about what cloud computing is and how the cloud service provider will not have access to your data. It was fundamental discussions. Know who your audience is, demystify with them, build capacity with them goes a long way. The more you can scale with associations, etc., the better it is. But do not underestimate the value of building capacity. And so, to your question, of course, completely agreed with Ankit. Of course, it has to be a multi-stakeholder approach. But whatever that mechanism is within your organization has to be highly empowered. And that means that it may have to be at the level of the board, or it may have to be at a level where it is able to take independent decisions, not just about the procurement, but also about the deployment, what sort of monitoring and supervision and trusted environments within which that audit has to happen, like all of the mechanisms for the operation of an AI system within your organization. So that
Sorry, I will have to cut
has
you
to be
short.
highly
I will
empowered.
ask you to take it later because we'll be thrown out in
Yeah,
some time.
I will answer quick the power issue, right? So see the way India, right? How much physical infrastructure are you going to build? Roads, metros, and all. It's not going to solve India problem. Only the way India is going to accelerate is by digital infrastructure. That means we have to put those grids required, all those things. That's the way we have to do. The kind of generation of the power we have, I think we have plenty of power available, with especially with renewable energy, both solar and wind. We're not touching the nuclear yet. But I think that is the way I believe India, if you want to take a leapfrog, they have to invest on the digital infrastructure. That in parallel with physical infrastructure. That's the way I look at it.
So I'll choose the question on who owns the AI project solution and the value that comes out of. So if we talk about it from a value perspective, it's the business teams, the functions themselves who are responsible for carving out processes, projects, and creating the ROI. It's not an IT project at all. IT is a support enabler for these processes. Again, if it is top down, which means that there is governance, there is management mandate right from the top levels of the organization, that helps kind of seeding in and making sure that the right processes, right technologies are covered. So that's the answer that I would have.
Thank you very much. And just quickly to answer your question, the data sovereignty is a big topic now, especially in Europe, um, considering the current geopolitical environment that we're in. So at the IGF, we do discuss it, and we are trying to help people and also businesses and governments realize that they have to support their local businesses. They have to have an environment where these local businesses can come up and build data centers, have good laws, good public policy instruments that encourages this. And also we also try and encourage technological transfer, and that was a big issue in the Western Plus 20 debate as well. So I'll be quick.
Thank you so much. And before we end the panel, I still have 4 minutes. We have a report which our joint teams had prepared. We would like to release it today with our panelists. And if you want more copies, the CIFI's booth is there at the expo. Unni can share more about it. But I'll just, Unni, would you like to come? We'd like to take a group photograph. Can the teams come? Aman, if you would like to come. Swati. Swati, come. Would you like us to stand up?
Yeah.